Welcome to this episode of Tom Talks, where today we're going to take a closer look at two phenomenal Aston Martin DB4 GTs that we currently have in stock. One being this stunning pale primrose example, and the other being this very famous lightweight. Now, to talk about the cars further, we have invited Marque expert and noted Aston Martin historian, Stephen Archer. Stephen, thank you for joining us.
Tom, delighted to be here and in such exalted company.
Ah, good. Grab a seat.
I must change my name to Marque expert.
Yes. So where did it all start for you anyway, though? Your relationship with Aston Martin, I've only ever known you associated with the Marque, and you were obviously the author to what I consider the DB4 GT Bible, the Palawan GT book. And where did your expertise and your relationship with Aston Martin come from?
Well, if it's expertise, it's 60 years of knowledge, because, well, a bit more than that actually, because I was nearly born in one, literally nearly born in one.
Oh, really?
So that's actually how it came about. And as a kid, I actually remember seeing DB4s, not 5s, DB4s being made at Newport Pagnell. So I may even have seen that car on the line in its day.
Now you're showing your age, Stephen.
I'm showing amazing age preservation, actually. So, but both. You're right.
So these two cars, phenomenal examples, or I think they're phenomenal examples.
Well, you're right. I mean, listen, these are the two best examples of their type, if you like, of DB4 GTs. I've always loved primrose DB4 GTs. They're so rare.
Yeah.
And in fact, they only made, of course, two, and that's the only surviving one.
And the other car that was pale primrose, that today is silver.
Shadow grey.
Oh, snow shadow.
Yeah, it lives in the south of France. So that's, forget that. So this is the only one, and it's just a stunning colour. It's not yellow. You think primrose is yellow. It's not yellow. It's a much more complex and subtle colour than that. It's got hints of blues and greys in it, and it changes with the light, and it's just the most divine colour.
Well, you know the story, obviously, because you follow these cars so closely, but when we purchased that car, it was a beautifully restored example, but was in a very dark blue with a beige leather interior. And, you know, I always say that colours make cars, and I love cars that are in rare colours. I love cars that are in very much period colours. And I thought, the one thing we've got to do is let's find a way to spend an absolute fortune, even though it didn't need it, but return the car to its original colour combination. And, you know, for me, I think it's, you know, the Wedgwood blue, I think, is a fantastic colour, of which there was only one.
There's two of those.
Two of those cars.
Yeah.
And then I love the pale primrose. They would be my standout colours.
Absolutely.
Let's start with that car, actually, then, because it's an extremely original example.
Extraordinarily original. And you have actually, with your investment in the car, now returned it to exactly as it left the factory. Not just the colour, but now it's got the correct headlights, it's got the correct front bumper and brake duct arrangement, which only the first 23 cars had, but only 7 of those cars today still have that correct arrangement. Look at it, that simple bumper with the number plate underneath it. It's as Touring intended the car to look, and as Aston Martin intended it to look when they designed the DB4 GT variation of the DB4. So now you've returned it to that with the original colours, the original Connolly hide in it, the right colour. And it's the right car to do that with, because the car's had such a pure history, lovely ownership history. We know from the engine records that it's not just the matching numbers, we know it's the original block, we know it's the original head in it.
Yeah.
So it's...
And the original carburetors.
And thank you for reminding me, it's so rare to find 45 DCOE 4s in a DB4 GT. They're usually 9s or some other upgrade from later, but they're the original carburetors. And of course I've driven the car, and I don't know why people change them. They're fantastic.
And those very early cars, those first 23, they were without the aluminium trim around the headlamps.
Correct.
So it was a
Correct.
cleaner, and I would call it a more sportier look.
Yes.
And then what you're talking about with regards the bumper and with regards the air scoops is on the later cars, a lot of people, when they think of a DB4 GT, you see a great big central scoop, quite a deep dish scoop underneath the bumper.
That's right.
Where on these cars, it's a bit cleaner, prettier look, where you've got the 3 scoops. And also the bumper, normally you'd have the square, on the chrome bumper, you'd have the square.
Yeah, flat front.
Flat front for the number plate.
The number plate bolted to the flat front.
But on this one, you've got the number plate on the underside.
Exactly, exactly. So it's just so pretty. It's wonderful. The number plates are actually such a curse on cars, especially in the front of cars. But at least that's now just tucked away as it should be, underneath, out of the way, and the car's beauty is allowed to speak for itself now.
And the history of that particular car, it was first delivered to a gentleman in the north of England. I think it was Garstang, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, William Jackson in Garstang. And they had a paper business dating back to the 1800s.
Yeah.
But actually, come the middle of the last century, they were making gaskets for aero engines, and they were a really important provider of gaskets for aero engines in the war. So it was a very special business, and they did very well. And William was the son of the owner at that time, and he treated himself to this car, which he competed in fact. Did some sprints in the car, the Sealand Sprint, and another one at Blackpool, and greatly enjoyed the car.
Blackpool, probably, I wonder if they were on the beach or not.
I sincerely hope not, but I think maybe whizzing under the tower, but no, beach, no, less so. And then, of course, after that, went to Peter Scott.
He's a very famous guy.
The naturalist, exactly, the naturalist. And people forget that, but he was also a great sportsman who greatly enjoyed sailing, and in fact designed...
Olympian, wasn't it?
Olympic sailor, designed his own yacht, and also extremely successful glider pilot, a competitive glider pilot. So...
and then it was later on in the Midland Motor Museum?
Exactly, Bob Roberts Midland Motor Museum, which at that time was a pioneering museum, they had really fine cars, but they had limited space, and after many years in that collection, then it went to Charles Renner, the Swiss collector, who actually kept it in this country with a friend of his, and used it over here and toured around Europe and so on. But it's always been loved and cherished.
It's always been with some very good people, actually, as well, isn't it? If you think about it, I think Charles owned the car for over 2 decades.
That's right.
And then when it came back to the UK, Richard Williams, one of the most famous Aston Martin names of all time, he sold the car to Adrian Johnson.
Right.
Adrian, who's does some super work, and he bought the car for himself. He wanted a GT.
He did. Yeah.
He had been looking for one for a while, and he wanted, he was a guy in the know. He is a guy in the know, and he wanted to find the right car for him to keep and restore. And then he sold it to, obviously, a very well-known collector in the north of England, where we acquired the car from. Yeah. It's just always been in very good hands, that car.
Very, very good hands. As you say, the collector in Yorkshire who had it was, or still is, one of the most discerning that we have in this country.
He's got the lowest mileage DB4 Zagato on the planet.
He has got the most original DB4 GT Zagato, extraordinarily low mileage car, and he had that car. And of course, interestingly, he only actually replaced that because he bought another DB4 GT.
That's right.
Even more special to him for
his racing version, which was 18 TVX, which we'll come on to, and then we managed to extrapolate that from him at a later date. But these cars, what stimulates me so much about the older cars is when you read their history files and you see all these interesting characters who own them new. And not to live in yesteryear, but it's not the same today, is it? Today there's a gazillion people in the world who could buy a new supercar, where back in those days you really were someone. If you were buying a new Aston Martin DB4 GT,
it was fantastic expensive car. It was nearly £5,000 back in 1960, which is a huge amount of money. Buy several houses back then, but you're right. And when I look at build sheets of Astons from that period, any Aston, particularly DB4 GT, the first thing I go to is, well, who first owned it? And then, even if you don't recognise the name, if you do a bit of research, quickly think, oh crikey, you know, it's the guy that first walked to the South Pole, or the guy that that walked up Everest without oxygen for the first time, or he ran a huge business empire. They were people, as you say, the great and the good, who had these sorts of cars, or raced them indeed.
A lot of people. They were the gentleman's racer. How did this is a good point, a good time to talk about how did the model first come about, the DB4 GT? This was Aston Martin took a DB4 and they basically turned it into what was DP199. Am I right in saying that?
That's right, but I think more to the point is it's the why. Because if you look at the Astons throughout history, they've always built cars that could be raced as well as driven on the road. Certainly until the 60s. Times have changed now. But in the pre-war period, you could take the Ulster. You could buy an Ulster. You could race it at Le Mans as it left the showroom floor. The DB2 of 1950 was a similar sort of thing. It actually was a GT car of its time. And of course, Aston was hugely successful in racing in the 50s, culminating in winning at Le Mans, naturally. And as soon as the DB4 came out, John Wyatt and David Brown sat down and said, this car must have the potential to be a future gentleman's racer, a customer's car that could be raced. But it wouldn't be the four-seater car, of course, the DB4 was. So John Wyatt then sanctioned, as you say, with DP199.
And what did they change from a normal DB4 to take it to a GT?
5 inches.
So they cut the chassis by 5 inches.
Right in the middle, they cut it out. It's in the door, the length comes out.
Engine
went from single plug to twin plug to different cams and valves, of course, and Webbers, and that
triple Webbers.
Triple Webbers,
yeah,
exactly. Fuel tank then goes in the boot or the trunk for our American friends, and your luggage just goes.
Twin fuel fillers.
Twin fuel fillers, just so you haven't got to reach your hose over the car or whatever. So that made a heck of a difference. So the DB4 GT is saving nearly 200 kilos over a DB4, which is significant. And of course, it's got increased power. And because of its chassis being a bit shorter, it's just tauter. It's become the right length to be able to steer it even better on the throttle than the DB4, and you can rotate it very easily on the throttle. So it was made to be a GT racing car that could be successful on the track. And of course, as soon as it did appear on the track, as we'll find out when we talk about the other car.
So the first outing for the DB4 GT was with DP199. That was a very successful first outing.
It won.
Yeah.
They won at Silverstone in Sterling Moss's hands quite comfortably, so they knew they were onto something. And in fact, that was almost 6 months before the DB4 GT was officially announced.
But that was basically a DB4 that they cut up.
Correct.
They took 5 inches out of it, and they had just converted a DB4. It wasn't born a DB4 GT.
No, they sacrificed one of the DB4 prototypes to create this car. And in fact, it wasn't particularly light when they built it because they had to strengthen the chassis so much. But of course, it did have a much more powerful engine, and it had that handling advantage. So that's why one of the reasons it performed so well at Silverstone in May 1959. But the marker was put down. It was clearly quite an impressive car.
So that then brings us on to this very famous car behind us, which is 18 TVX. This is one of the 9 lightweight cars, but this is the first car. This and its sister, both 124 and 125, were the first 2 lightweight GTs built, and they were not built on the production line, but they were built in the experimental department, and they were designated master project cars. They were given MP203. And on the build sheet of this car, which I find fascinating, those words when it says built in the experimental department, as somebody who is infatuated with Ferrari and love Ferrari so much, if we ever saw that on a Ferrari build sheet, we get stimulated and excited when we talk about a 250 having a magnesium gearbox cover, let alone a car that's built in the experimental department and designated, given a master project number. So tell me about these cars. What happened?
Well, again, it's the why is as interesting as the how. You described a bit of the how, but the why is equally important, because Aston Martin had withdrawn from racing at the end of 1959. David Brown had achieved his goal of winning Le Mans, and he did intend to carry on with Grand Prix racing, which didn't go particularly well for them. But they'd withdrawn from sports car racing, and the team, though, was still there. So all mechanics and all engineers and designers were still at Feltham in the racing department and the experimental department. All the skills were there.
It's incredible, after they just won Le Mans in 1959, that they decided to pull out of their GT racing and focus at that time on Formula One.
Yes, and in fact, had they...
In hindsight, I would say not the best move they've ever done.
Well, the real tragedy, if you like, of it was that the car was ready for 1958 when it would have done extremely well, but come 59 and 1960 it was outclassed by rear-engine cars. Another story altogether. But racing is the DNA of Aston Martin, and it's in David Brown's blood. But you've got to remember, he personally financed their racing. The company couldn't fund the racing program that he invested in. A great deal of money to send 4 cars to Le Mans in 1959. So for him, I think it was a good time to take a break, if you like, but he still wanted Aston Martin to be known as the cars that are successful on the track. So what better than to have a car that was suitable for privateers, or more to the point, very, very professional private teams to run. So that opportunity was clearly there for them, and to really bring that idea to fruition, they came up with the idea in early 1960 to create the lightweight Project 203 DB4 GTs. And the first 2 cars, you'd say, included this particular car, 18 TVX. And
there is some documentation that still exists today, I think,
yes,
where they internal documentation, yes, where they talk about the lightening that's needed, and talking about what other manufacturers are doing at that time.
Correct. So they took it very seriously. As I say, the bare chassis went down to Feltham, and they just cut all the steel out of it they didn't need, which is quite a lot actually, and replaced that with aluminium sheeting. Drilled various holes in the box sections of the chassis, which you can still see today, but thinner gauge aluminium on the body. When the body, actually the chassis would have gone back to Newport Pagnell to Tickford to have the body put back on, and then the car go back to Feltham to be built as the racing car that you see here today. So they were very serious about it, and they needed to be, because their first customers were Tommy Sockworth of Cube Endeavour, and for this car, John Ogier and Essex Racing, and these were really serious privateers. Ogier was, the classic patriot. He'd been in Montgomery's aide-de-camp in World War II, and he was a pioneer of poultry farming in this country, and he wanted Britain to succeed on the racetrack. So he was therefore very keen to invest in these cars, and in fact he ordered 2 of these lightweight cars, and this was the first one. And
is it fair to say that he had a hell of a lot of factory support? He would be a semi-works team.
Oh, more than that. In fact, really, he had none of his own employees attending the racing. The deal was, we'll sell you the car, and we'll also suggest who should drive the cars.
Which is where the likes of Roy Salvadori,
Innes Ireland, and in the other car, Tony Maggs and Jim Clark. So they said, okay, this is who you should have drive the cars, we suggest. We will provide all the mechanics, all the support. So if you look at the mechanics that are surrounding the car at these events that Ogier took the cars to.
It all works.
It was the same people at Le Mans in 59.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same people. All works. And all the work was done by the factory. So Ogier really, in a sense, just had to turn up with the car and run it. But it was under his banner, but he was flying Aston Martin's flag, if you like, and he was making a large part of the investment for Aston Martin, and successfully so. So
just to recap, we start off with the DB4. Aston Martin decide that we need to go racing with this DB4. They then chop 5 inches out of the chassis. They increase the horsepower, twin plug engine, triple Weber carburetors, make it racy. which turns into the gentleman racer DB4 GT, a bit like 121.
Correct.
They then get serious and can see that actually this car is very competitive. It's given the Ferraris a run for their money. If we give it to our experimental department, our racing department, and we trick this up a little bit more, we can make this a seriously competitive car. So they then take, this being one of the first 2 cars, this was the car that was designated the master project car. They thinner gauge aluminium, aluminium floors, aluminium bulkhead.
Front and rear bulkheads and rear floor under the tank, aluminium.
Lighten the chassis. Stripped to the interior, you have the just the rubber overmats instead of the
seats.
nice thick Wilton carpet like we get in the.
No carpet.
And the seats, actually, very sexy seats. The DBR1
type seats, exactly right.
DBR1
Very
seats.
light.
Windows, no glass.
Well, no glass. Perspex all round except for the screen.
And how much weight did they save?
Oh, about 75. A further 100 kilos. By taking those things out of the car. So quite a lot. That's a person. That's like having a passenger in the car removed for a race.
And then, obviously, the first outing we have the sister car that wins.
That's right. Sister car 124 wins in April 1960 with Sterling Moss.
And then this car at Goodwood, it goes to the TT.
But before that, Jonathan Seif of the Marks
and Spencer's dynasty
was entered by Ogier at Rouen. In the 3-hour race there, and did very well there. I can't remember where he came in the race.
I think he came. He either came 5th or he came 6th.
Sixth. He was sixth
DBR won.
DBR,
and then there was some
exactly.
250 short wheelbases.
Correct.
But you know, Jonathan, to be fair, he could afford to fund many racing teams at that time, but he wouldn't be a Roy Salvadori, or he wouldn't be a.
He was the classic gentleman driver. So the first time actually that this car appeared was in the sort of person they hoped to sell lots of DB4 GTs to. As it happens, he didn't buy the car. It was Ogier's car. But it was a good example, and other cars, of course, were bought by people who could afford it and raced it themselves later on.
But then its real famous moment, its shining, its time in the sun, was certainly its second race.
And it was a sunny day, as is often the case at Goodwood for the Tourist Trophy in 1960. And the thing is, people think, Tourist Trophy 1960, Moss wins in Rob Walker's short wheelbase Ferrari. That's not the full story by a long way, because Roy Salvadori in this car qualified second in the race. And he got a terrific start, and he was on Sterling's bumper right from the start. And there's numerous pictures of him slipstreaming him all the way around Goodwood. And in fact, at one point, Roy did get past him.
He literally was sat on the bumper for most of the race, wasn't he?
And he passed him, and he actually got away from Sterling a bit for a while. And Sterling was quite rattled by this. And it was only pit stops that changed the order again. And then, unfortunately, Roy got a puncture, and that really removed the chance of him winning the race. But it was
But finished second.
Finished second, and the other Ogier car finished third, by the way, in Ireland's hands, despite the exhaust braking on it. But it was a gripping race. People forget that. It was absolutely gripping, and the result really looked like Aston's nearly got this, and essentially for the first time out with this lightweight GT. So Aston Martin were thrilled to bits. The publicity at the time actually was good. Ogier was delighted, and as a result of that, after the end of that year, he bought 2 racing Zagatos.
And actually, Ogier, after he finished racing the car in 60, in 61 he had the DB4 Zagatos, which were a lighter car, a more competitive car again.
Well, in theory. Yes, exactly. The competition had moved on a bit, but yes.
And he actually used this car. He had bumpers fitted to it, he had a heater fitted in it, and he took this car to Le Mans as his own personal transport. He drove it there and drove it back.
Absolutely.
So he was obviously very fond of the car. After he finished racing it, campaigning it in 1960, he decided to keep it himself. And then following that, changed hands a few times, but all with really well-known, highly regarded UK collectors. I mean, I remember, I think in the early 70s, it went to Robert Cooper.
Cooper of Metals. And
do you know, I sold him a car 25 years ago, actually.
Did you really?
Yeah, I did. I always remember him, a very tall gentleman.
Distinguished fellow. Exactly, yes. He had a 3S at the same time, and he campaigned the car regularly and looked after it very well. And then, of course, it went to
went to Martin McGlone.
Martin McGlone, very well regarded collector and competitor with Aston's, and unfortunately Martin had a bit of an accident with it at Goodwood in '78. But Martin Rayner, who was ex-Aston guy, repaired it, and he used almost all the original metal in the car, amazingly. But he was a body and chassis guy from the factory from those times, so he knew exactly what he was doing.
And the history file today, actually, which I think we have here. I noticed that the invoicing for the car, the people who were maintaining it very early on was Connaught Cars.
Yes.
These are all ex-Aston Martin people, and these invoices date back incredibly to 1962. Like 62, 63.
All these handwritten invoices. It's a beautiful, beautiful file. And it just shows you how much the car's been appreciated when a file like that's been kept. But it's not had that many owners, which is nice.
No, it hasn't. I think in total it might have had about 7 owners throughout his life.
Which for a
and of the 7 owners, it's like reading who's who of the Aston Martin fraternity.
Yeah, precisely. But today, as we look at this car, we have to appreciate it as a project racing GT Aston Martin. It was Aston Martin, if you like, racing by proxy, by using very good privateer teams to run the cars for them, supported by the factory.
I don't think the general public understand the importance, actually, the significance of this particular car over other GTs. This is a car that, like I said to you earlier on, if it was a Ferrari and we heard that it had a competition-style magnesium gearbox cover, we'd get excited and want to put £500,000 on the price. This car, forgetting about the history on what it done, just the way it started life, just the way Aston Martin set about and documented it all, which can be seen today in your wonderful Palawan GT book, or just that this car is a master project car. This is going to be built in the experimental department. Obviously, they built 9 GTs, but of the 9 GTs, lightweights. But very respectfully, for me, there's only a couple of really standout cars, and I don't want to turn around and go, and this is certainly the best one, but it's got to be the most.
You can say that.
Yeah, I know, but we sold a 167, which is an amazingly pure car, a lightweight. That was the factory development car, very original, but. The TVX cars, 17 and 18 TVX, those Essex Racing Stable cars, without the results and without the great results that these cars managed to obtain, it affected Aston Martin.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. And I think we have to think about these cars as the TVX GTs in the same way as the VEV Zagato, 1 and 2 VEV. They are rightly...
Coincidentally, the Essex Racing Stable cars.
Exactly, and they're both Essex number plates. So they are significant in Aston's racing history because they represent the continuation of racing. And to the degree that this led to a lightweight Zagato in 1962, that car led to the Project 2 and 4, which ran at Le Mans in 63 and ultimately won at Monza, beating the GTOs. But mentioning GTO brings me to another important point, and that is that when these first appeared, they gave Ferrari something to think about the short wheelbase, and it made Ferrari really up their game. So
they had to bring the CFAT car out. Basically, they had to up.
Exactly.
They had to up the game.
They had to upgrade the short wheelbase, and then when the Zagatos appeared in 61. Although they weren't much more competitive than the DB4 GTs, again, Ferrari's we need to do something, and of course the response to that was the 250 GTO. So you could say in a sense that these cars are the reason that GTOs exist today.
And actually, this car, this is the point I'm trying to get. This car in particular, this is the car where it all started from. Of the lightweight GTs, this was the this is the car that on its build sheet it says built in the experimental department. I've had other lightweight GTs before, and I haven't seen that on the build sheets.
Exactly. It is only one of the two cars where it says built in the experimental department.
Yeah.
So, and I think the other thing to say is that of the other 9 cars, really only 7 kind of count because only 7 were sold for competition use.
Yeah.
And they were mostly for amateurs to use in competitions too. So really only 3 of the cars, including the Sopwith car, were built for professional teams, if I can put it that way. But they are not appreciated as much as they should be. And to be honest, in a sense, I'm guilty of it myself because since the GT book was completed 4 or 5 years ago now, I continue to do research and I continue to look into the cars, and now I appreciate.
Well, new material is found all the time as well, isn't it?
New material is found.
And when you have the opportunity to, like, do you recall when we bought 167 from the museum and it came out and then you crawled all over it, and when you crawl all over a car, you find out so much more about a car.
Yeah, and you see how the story sort of knits together, if you like, and which is now why we have even better understanding now, looking at the narrative of what Aston did and why they did it, when they did it, and how they also looked at development, because it's the works records are not just about the cars they built, also the development work they did on them going forward after each race, sort of thing, and you can just see what they were trying to do, and they were just trying to catch up with Ferrari and trying to beat Ferrari, and of course every time they go Ferrari trouble, Ferrari say, more horses, please.
More horses and less light in it.
More horses and yes, take the steel off, put aluminium on, and then less aluminium, and so on and so forth. So
magnesium.
It's an arms race. Yeah, magnesium, exactly. Yeah. It's an arms race. And in fact, in '62, Aston Martin actually made a magnesium engine. They were that desperate to try and beat the GTOs.
They always had to keep improving, but you have to, don't you?
Yes.
Okay, so let's take a closer look at them.
It's a good idea.
Let's start with 121. Now, for me, I'm a big believer that cars should be driven. I use my own cars. I take them to the golf course if I ever get a chance to play golf these days, or go out for lunch or dinner. Just use the car. Don't worry about getting it dirty. However, I do think the restoration on this particular car is so good and so exact that I hope before somebody starts putting mileage on it, I'd love to see it be entered into some of the great concours events like Villa d'Este or Pebble Beach, just because it deserves it.
Absolutely. This is so worthy of it, because when you see this car in the flesh and you let that primrose come to you, the colour, then you think, I get that. Yeah, I now see how that colour made great sense then and is actually a very special colour today. It would look incredible on a concours lawn.
On a concours lawn, but I just love how the wheels. So many GTs you see with the wrong finish. So many times you just see them all chrome, and sometimes you'll see Spanish carburetors.
Terrible.
Underneath.
As bad as golf clubs on the back of the car.
Yeah.
Actually,
No, there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with golf clubs.
Golf club. No, well, some other discussion, but we'll leave that alone.
But here, when you look at everything and all of the leads, the fixings, everything about the car is just so correct, and it's also looks like it's ready to eat your breakfast off.
It's perfect. It's exactly as it would have left the factory in its day, right down to, and this is where I get incredibly anarchic, 3 wires on the washer bottle top.
Yeah.
You don't see many of those around, but I'll move on from that. But the star feature, I think, of this engine, apart from its originality, it's still 3.7, is that it's got the original carburetors on, which is extraordinary, and they run beautifully. And to that,
but it's quite common because these cars were campaigned in period, hill climbs or just local sprints or anything. But sometimes you would find a block or a head that may have been replaced.
Yes.
This car, it's got original block, original head, original carburetors, Original body, original chassis, original gearbox.
Everything. And it just makes it feel so special when you have that degree of originality, and it's so unusual, and have all the records to back that up as well, right down to the head number. You've got the record for that.
I recall Spraytech actually. You know, I think Adrian and the team there do just a fantastic job. Cosmetically, there's nobody as good as them in the Aston Martin world, but they were pointing out to me about the shock absorbers on this car and the springs to get the exact period correct finish. Correct. Which they reckon you see very few GTs with that finish today.
No, I mean, look at the most GTs and you'll see orange dampers and the conies. That's not right. You know, he's got the original Armstrong style blue dampers. Everything about this car is as it should be, and you know, a Concord judge who knows anything about these cars is going to say, well, this is as it should be.
And the other car here doesn't have the bumpers fitted to it, obviously, but you can see the central cooling scoop. The difference between the slightly later car, because the first 23 cars had, this is the correct bumper and the correct.
That's right.
The correct cooling scoop.
And exactly, and this bumper is such a lovely shape. And I have to say, the fit of the bumper is extraordinarily good. It's so special. But of course, this car never had bumpers.
Never had bumpers, and being a lightweight, even if it would have been a production car, it would have had the aluminium trim around the headlamps, being chassis 125.
That's right, it would have done.
But being a lightweight,
being lightweight, you wouldn't do that on the car. Right.
And then you obviously
Perspex all round.
Yeah, perspex all rounds, and then it is a much more sparse interior, isn't it?
Yeah, you don't have the leather on the door cards. You don't have even a door handle of that sort. You've got more of a Zagato.
No armrest.
Interior. No armrest, and of course these very light, simple seats. No carpeting in there.
And John Ogier, all of his race cars, spec'd up sea green with off-white interior. Not all sea green.
No, not all sea green. In fact, the sister car to this was Goodwood green, which is like a British racing green.
But all off-white interior.
All had off-white interior, and the Zagato, the 61, also had off-white interior. I don't quite understand where that idea came from, but that's what he did, and that is exactly how the car would have appeared in 1960 with those seats in it. And I have to say, they're very comfortable, and of course, as we know,
and also they're very sexy.
Yeah,
they make it look like we're just about to start Goodwood ourselves.
Precisely, and there's something about hot oil, some unburnt petrol, and then Connolly leather on top of that, and then you've got something really intoxicating, but. As you say,
calm down, you're getting very excited here, Stephen. But and the other thing I think is worth touching on with regards this particular car is that yes, it was a competition car, and all competition cars have, you know, little war wounds in their life. But this is basically the same car that left the factory. You know, it is the same car, and you know, it's the same engine as it last left the factory with.
Exactly.
And you know, of some of those lightweight cars, again, we're not here to talk any other cars down, but there's some of the lightweight cars that might have a 4-litre block fitted to it, or you know, have had, you know, and no longer the same car that competed in period.
Cars have their lives, and sometimes their lives are not as good as others. They're not as fortunate. I mean, you know, the Primrose car here is an exceptional one.
That's very rare, isn't it?
This is a racing car. The racing car, you sort of shouldn't really expect a car to have the original engine in it.
Yeah.
But it does.
Yeah.
So I think that does make it really quite special.
And it's so good that it's still got the number plate.
And, well, it would be lost without number plate, wouldn't it? Exactly.
Can you imagine turning up in this car? This is what excites me so much. Either racing it at Goodwood, or even just turning up to Goodwood in it. You know, say if you've got something else that you want to race it, because the car's an extremely valuable car today. You might want to race something that's maybe not quite as valuable, and, you know, not be so protective of worrying, diving into that first corner.
Well, that's true, but then don't forget last year the sister car was racing at Goodwood.
Yeah.
So brave fellow, very brave fellow.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yes, but otherwise I agree. If you were racing anything at Goodwood, but you just drove this and put it in the
Just
paddock.
turned up in the paddock and just parked this up.
I think that's
pretty cool, isn't it?
Very, very. That's a very stylish moment, definitely.
Stephen, one final question for you.
It's gonna be difficult, isn't it?
You've got the choice. You've got the choice to drive home in either car, or you buy either car, keep either car in your collection. Which one do you go for?
Well, the easy answer, of course, is buy both. I mean, obviously. The choice is between, I'm driving this, I'm in Salvador's seat, and there's a short wheelbase in front of me, driven by Moss, I'm about to pass it. And that makes me shiver. So that's pretty special. And then that car is simply perfectly original and beautiful. And
Sounds like you're going to go for both.
it's going to be both. But both are great in their own ways. I mean, how can you choose between the two? They are different in so many ways. Although they're both GTs, but they're so different.
They're different cars. They've got different lives.
They're not like with like.
Yeah.
You know, if it was two production GTs or two lightweights, that would be an answer I would probably be able to answer. But no.
Let's take them out on the road. And,
Let's
let's see what you think.
Let's find out how they go. Exactly.
And thank you for today.
No,
You've been a great guest.
No, it's been a pleasure, Tom. Thank you for having me.
No.
It's been wonderful talking about them and meeting old friends again.
Thank
They
you.
are.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you.